In the last few days, I've run across friends and family and associates who are deeply troubled by the events in France and who feel that their universe has been upset. My daughter, however, brilliant at 16, pointed out to me immediately, well, she says, yes, it is horrible, but she says this kind of horror exists in lots of places that we don't pay attention to on a daily basis. So
Yeah.
I just wanted your thoughts on this. And
Well, it was very interesting. I heard an NPR show yesterday interviewing somebody who was essentially making the same observation and really making a call for the media to rethink its coverage. So we have, 24/7 coverage of the crisis and the breakdown in Paris. He said, in Lebanon, the prior week, the exact same thing happened. There was only 60 people killed or something. But, it was basically mentioned, it was mentioned that it happened, but there was no coverage of the victims. There was no empathy with the situation. There was no immediate interest, basically, in the backstories, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But yet, a few more people get killed in Paris, and now we have this, 24/7, 7 days a week kind of coverage. So I think that where the media's attention is definitely is kind of a reflection of our connection to the larger global reality that we all live in. I was also struck by this tragedy. In one sense, it was not nearly as devastating as 9/11, and I think a lot of what it did is reactivate a lot of that experience. We also forget that in Paris, the police massacred 200 protesters. In France, Paris specifically was, very much in lockdown. I remember when I went there, there were policemen on every corner. But during that particular period, there was a protest of a few thousand people, 200 of which were basically shot and mowed down by the French police. So again, I don't think this kind of violent hysteria is necessarily new, nor is it specific to our times. I think that what I shared with some people in the seminar, that if you take away the moral overlay, it's a strategy, and it's a brilliant strategy. I mean, in one day, with a dozen people, they managed to completely lock down Europe. Probably cost trillions of dollars before it's done. Essentially panicked mostly every city in Europe for sure, but at least maybe more cities in the world. It totally reactivated all of our 9/11 stuff. And, this was just one move in a game, one strategic move, and they devastated the West. And so in that sense, they're winning. I have no idea exactly how to counter that, other than to say I'm reasonably sure that when we overreact and or bring the quote might of the West to bear, it becomes you get what you resist. We're actually empowering that insanity. I was talking to Gay Hendricks. I mean, he thinks of it like a cancer.
Yeah.
Where we've got, a disease that essentially is devouring its host, and the more those cells mobilize to fight it, there's more food for them to chew on.
So this is worth your time. I guess the other part of the question I want to ask you is, looking at the mindset of the perpetrators, looking at how the construct that they're working in keeps them ignited beyond our response. How is it in this time can people come to such a narrow view of the world? How is it that we can, if they have access to the internet, how is it that they hold such a stringent view of religion and life and death and notions of of evil and good in from their perspective. I guess we have some of the same kinds of thinking in our society, but I want to examine that mind. I want to understand how people can cordon off or not be exposed to the larger world.
Well, that's a big question. I don't know. I mean, on one level, Phyllis, I really don't know. I mean, I speculate. I just had an interesting analogy come into my mind. Uh, you're calling for us to try to understand a world and a reality that literally cannot be understood from our perspective. I mean, even the question is a fairly elitist, educated, Western, techno-informed kind of question. You know, it would be like me saying to you, you know, why do black people think that there's a problem?
Mm-hmm.
You know, why don't they trust us? You know, why do they feel that you know, there's discrimination on campuses? You know, after all these years, and you know, 50 years since Martin Luther and all that, you know, it looks to me like the problem went away, but some of you people are aggravating it. You see what I'm saying? It's one of those. A white man or a woman can't really understand the black experience.
Right. So the context of my question is based on my experience and can't really grasp the reality that they're in because I'm not in that reality.
Yeah, exactly.
I got it.
And so, I mean, one of my interests is how do we build a world in which we can coordinate our differences?
Mm-hmm.
You know, but in order to get to that place, I think we have to have enough of a common ground to stand on. So, for example, you're assuming that they're committed to living or that their value of life is the same as ours. I'm not sure that's true. I've also tried to project myself into that world of saying, you know, if I had no money, if I had no prospects, if I felt the rest of the world had left me and my culture behind, you know, and I look at the world at some facts that I also got off the internet, like 80% of the world is living on 10%. You know, 4,000 or 5,000 people own most of the money in the world. You know, why would I want to participate in that? You know, because even if I'm allowed into the room, at best I'm going to be, you know, cleaning the floors. You know, and so consequently, it would be very easy to imagine feeling a lot of deep resentment and downright hatred. And have a real, authentic commitment to destroy it. I think what's historically interesting is maybe for the first time in history, there is actually the possibility of doing that. You know, I mean, there've been people with grievances for forever, but they've been either small enough, not powerful enough, or not able to essentially make a hell of a lot of difference. They could be big annoyance factors, and they could extract some blood, but fundamentally they were not life-threatening, certainly not at a global level. But now, in part because of the internet and because of this mass media and because of the power of the West, those same individuals with that same level of hatred now have access through transportation, through weaponry, through science, through research, through communication, to have a disproportionately large impact on the bigger system. So why they think the way they think, or how they, I mean, it sounds to me like they are fairly committed to destroy the West. They're not interested in negotiating. They're not. The thing that makes them so frightening is they don't have a agenda with which you could negotiate. I mean, mostly if you have a war or a conflict, both parties want something. But if one party or the other is completely committed to the destruction of the other, there's no middle ground. Now, I also think that there's a book I read one time called Culture War, in which this guy was saying that the ultimate conflict is between the humanist and the fanatic, or the orthodox. He said the orthodox. And the difference is, where do you ultimate authority. In the Orthodox, it's with God, and with the humanists, it's with human beings. So if you have a belief system, that God is the ultimate arbiter of value and truth and righteousness, you feel that your God and your way of life is being threatened. It's perfectly logical in my mind that you formulate initially resistance and eventually an army of combatants that have no other purpose than to kill the other guy. Sort of like in the movie with Patton. When Patton gives that speech in that movie, he stands up, your job is to kill the other guy. That's the only job you have. And as a soldier and as a warrior and as a mindset, it seems to me that that's the mindset of a terrorist. They have only one objective, which is essentially to produce enough chaos and havoc to drive the enemy into a lockdown, to exacerbate fear to the point that people are paralyzed and eventually they're easy to kill.
Well, I just really appreciate your thinking about this and being willing to bring it up and to look at it. I do see some positive possibilities out of this, that more of a global environment, a global consciousness could come from our having an appropriate response to this. So some of that you touched on earlier in your answer. Is there anything you want to add, because we're about at the end of our time?
Well, not about that, other than it's one of a numerous intractable problems. I had a few minutes with Gay and Katie last night, Hendricks, and I said, if you think about the old maxim about every problem has an opportunity, and you look at problems like terrorism and some of the stuff that's going on, it's hard to imagine what the problem is or what the opportunity is in all this. Now, when we talk about transforming global consciousness, I mean, that's certainly the drum I play, is that maybe we are approaching some form of global unity of thinking and well-being, and that this is a breakdown before the breakthrough. I'd like to think that, but frankly, sometimes in my own private reflections, I think, well, maybe am I just being optimistic and hopeful, or is there some grounding for that view? I go back and forth. I mean, some days it looks like this is a intractable and unresolvable condition that will be with us for certainly the rest of my life. And other times I think, we're within a few years of something. I actually think that probably if there's something that could really make a huge difference here, it's going to be climate change. Maybe climate change is the external threat that's big enough and uniform enough that it could bring opposing sides together in some kind of a common cause. In the same way that ISIS is now bringing the Soviet Union, Iran, and the West, at least into some kind of a coalition against ISIS. I think external threats have always mobilized unity, at least in the short term. And I think it's going to take some kind of a planet-threatening reality to make much difference. It's also, there's one other aggravating condition, which is the whole Islamic view of, it's God's will. It's a very fatalistic outlook on life. So there's not a lot of difficulty accepting doomsday scenarios if you live in that kind of fatalistic reality.